Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. I'm here today with Kerry Barrett. Kerry Barrett is the founder and CEO of Kerry Barrett Consulting, a full-service media training and public speaking boutique. Kerry helps clients from every walk of life bring out their inner rock star when it comes to speaking in front of an audience or in front of a camera, across all media platforms, and in creating today's best messaging tool, video. She polishes your message, tunes up body language, and tailors your presentation so it is memorable and always resonates. Kerry is an Emmy Award-winning TV news anchor, reporter, and broadcaster. She has appeared on the Weather Channel, NBC, ABC, and Fox TV stations in markets across the country. Most recently as a reporter and anchor on WNBC's morning newscast, Today in New York. She is also a wife, dog lover, and mother of 3, 8 years, 5 years, and 2 years, which likely means she spent at least some of the night last night changing diapers, getting milk, soothing away a bad dream, and escorting multiple children to the potty. It also most likely means she is on her 14th cup of coffee. Today's episode was so great with Kerry. She gives us all kinds of strategies on how to become better at presenting ourselves on camera, since so many of us have been driven to work at home during the pandemic. A lot of us aren't used to being on Zoom and Skype or having to lead meetings on a camera. So she gives us all kinds of tricks, how to look like you're energetic even when you don't feel like it, how to recover if you make a mistake gracefully, and how to just look energetic and polished. She is a pro, and she also gave so many hilarious stories of things that happened on air, things that might have been embarrassing, and just how it was to work as a female news anchor. This was an excellent interview. So without further ado, let's dive in. I'm so excited to welcome Kerry Barrett to the show today.
Not as excited as I am to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, you are in my favorite color as well as anybody who knows me. I had to not go full in when I built my fitness boutique because I wanted pink turf.
Can you find pink turf? Is that a thing?
Yes, I actually did.
But you didn't use it?
Because I have too much other pink and I thought it would just be so pink.
It's like Barbie or like Legally Blonde, a little bit of overkill. Listen, I would have been fully on board had you done it, but next time.
Oh, cool. I was like, well, like I have been so pink for so long. I did go a little turquoise with the pink.
There you go. The little turquoise, you know what? The two go well together. It's like a Caribbean island sort of theme. I love it. I love what you're wearing now, and I am a huge fan of pink. And one of the reasons is that I feel like it's one of those colors that no matter how tired you are, it gives you a little extra zhuzh. Like, I understand there are different shades, and all shades may not work on everybody, but for the most part, it's one of those colors that when I put it on, I'm like, oh, I actually look like I slept a little bit last night. This isn't all bad.
It's like a power color,
yes.
And I know we all have our power colors, so it's good to lead with your best foot forward. And I really want to dive into your career as a newscaster, news anchor.
Mm-hmm.
How did you ever get started into all of that?
You know, honestly, it was definitely not a straight path, but I will give you the abridged version. I grew up pretty much up until about high school, slightly before moving all over the place. My dad was not in the military, but he worked for a company that did a lot of work overseas. And so we lived in Britain and we lived in Saudi Arabia. And in between those stints, we did a heck of a lot of traveling overseas, and we were all over the country as well. And so I will say, I think that started to sort of inform my career choices. I didn't never articulate it that way, but I became interested in people's stories and the way that they live and different cultures and different beliefs and just sort of what makes people individuals. So put that aside. When I was in high school, I decided that I wanted to go into veterinary medicine. I wanted to be a veterinarian, large animals. And I love animals. I've always had dogs and cats and horses and everything in between. And when I got to college, I realized that chemistry and I, as I like to say, were never going to be friends. I enjoyed going out a little bit too much to ever really buckle down and make chemistry a priority in my science-based career. And so I took a year and a half off, and I still, at the end of that year and a half, had really no idea what it was that I wanted to do. But my school, I went to Clemson University for undergrad, had started a communications program, or they had broadened it. It was very broad. There was marketing, and there was PR, and there was some journalism, mostly print, and there was speech pathology, and there was business communications, and there was interpersonal communication. The whole shebang is what I'm getting at. And I thought, surely I could re-enroll in that program and find something with which I could use to make a living, some skill set, some knowledge. And oh, by the way, there was no science involved. And maybe, just maybe, I would get a handle on this insane fear of public speaking that I had. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I had always, since I was quite young, I've been the person who was at the back of the room when it was time to give a speech. And I don't mean just in the back of the room because I was trying to go last. I mean, back of the room, hyperventilating, good chance I might have passed out, definitely in the fetal position, sort of rocking back and forth. It was not a pretty picture. And I knew on some level that I was going to have to be able to get some sort of grip on that if I was to ever have any sort of career. And so while I never intended to really go into journalism, I knew that if I re-enrolled in communications, I would have to take a public speaking course. Hopefully that would be kind of a safe space for me to begin to practice those skills. Anyway, because I was a year and a half behind, I was jamming up my schedule. 12 hours is full time. I was taking 24. I wanted to make up for lost time. And one of the ways that I could jam an extra 3 credits into my schedule was to do an internship, because I could create the internship around my schedule, didn't have to sit in a classroom. I thought, this is fabulous. So I got an internship at a local TV station. This is in Greenville, South Carolina. WYFF was the NBC affiliate. And on day one, I was out with a reporter and a photographer on a pretty big story for a town that size. It's not huge. And I remember saying, oh my gosh, this is freaking awesome. I totally need to do this. I love it. I had no idea I wanted to do this. And so from that point on, I had to figure out how to get a grip on my public speaking fears. And I did that through, I went on to graduate school. I had 3 more internships under my belt. And then I got my first job in this tiny little town in north central Texas called Wichita Falls, super small market. And I will say this, it wasn't until I had been in that role for probably about 6 months that I actually did start to not have a complete breakdown when that red tally light went on, which is not to say I didn't still make my fair share of mistakes, because I sure as heck did. But what I learned in that 6 months was I learned that I could recover when I did make a mistake. And I think that that's sort of the crux of beginning to grow your confidence when it comes to public speaking, whether it's in front of an audience live or whether it is through a camera to a live audience that you just can't see. It's not being perfect. It's being competent and it's being understandable and comprehensible, but it's not about being perfect. It's about getting that knowledge and that basic skill set, and then the confidence that comes with it to know that when like it really does go off the rails, you're going to be able to bring it back. And that's where I started to really hone my craft. That was a very long answer. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's perfect. I love it. I love it. And so many things popped in my head to ask you now. So when you're talking about recovering from mistakes, isn't it your attitude towards them too? Like if I just kind of laugh it off and move on and don't get all, frazzled.
Yes. Huge. And it depended. I mean, a little bit of that depended, at least in sort of the news scenario, because you are covering such a wide variety of topics. I could have been covering anything from, what happened during 9/11, because that happened when I was on the job, to like the local, charity is having a fundraiser. And so how you recover a little bit, and trust me, I've made my fair share of mistakes during a really serious news story that I can't laugh off. I have to apologize for and fix and move on. And then I've made plenty of mistakes where I'm doing a light, fluffy story, and the recovery from something like that is completely different. But what in general works is if it is appropriate to have sort of a little self-deprecating joke or like a one-liner that you could keep in your back pocket to pull out the way a comedian does when there's a heckler that you can go to, and you start to feel comfortable with that. Saying you're sorry, not stumbling all over yourself, apologizing profusely and getting all sloppy about it, and then moving on is generally the best way to go. And realize that most people, even though that mistake may have seemed cringeworthy to you, in many cases, people either A, don't even notice that you've made a mistake, or B, all they're thinking is, wow, she handled that pretty well. I don't know if I had made a mistake that I would have been able to handle it that well. And you end up in many cases endearing yourself to your audience. And really at the end of the day, especially when it comes to something as personal and as scary as video or public speaking, endearing yourself to your potential clients or the people who are looking to you for knowledge is a big part of bringing them to you. People are scared when it comes to speaking on camera. It's not an easy place to be for most of us.
No. So inquiring minds want to know, what would be your go-to for a self-deprecating joke?
It really would depend on the situation and the type of show, because I would have some news directors who were like not a fan of any sort of like fluffy stuff, and then I would have some that would tell me to go full tilt. So for example, I'll give you two examples. I was on a news program in a large market, and we had come in, as you may have heard, it snows occasionally in the Northeast, but it's now become a big deal, and we have to go on air for like 10 hours at a time because in the Northeast during wintertime we got snow. And so we had our morning show started at 4 a.m, and we had pushed up the start time to 3 a.m. because there was supposed to be a snowstorm. All the forecasters got it wrong. Here we are sitting on the desk. We've got like 10 reporters out in the field. There's not a drop of snow anywhere. And they're trying to sell it, because that's what you're supposed to do. Like, I promise you next time you check back with us in 30 minutes, there'll be some snow on the ground, blah, 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 blah. And so one of them, our viewers aren't stupid, most of them. So with one of them sent it back to me, and I'm like, so are you saying that we shouldn't have started a full hour earlier? Right? So, here it is. We're making a big to-do out of nothing, and I feel a little bit stupid about it, and we all feel a little bit stupid about it. And I just cracked a joke. We all had a giggle, and then we moved on. In another case, at a different morning show, at a different market, but also a large city, I had tried to spit out a sentence that it didn't matter how many times I stopped and started over again. The sentence was not coming out. Like it was just a mishmash of consonants and vowels. And I finally stopped myself and I looked at my co-anchors and then I looked at our viewers through the camera and I said, you know what? Do you ever feel more stupid for having watched us? Because I can feel my brain cells actually draining out of me right now. And then we all had a chuckle. I was able to recuperate and we were able to move on, right? If I was doing a serious story though, I obviously wouldn't be able to react in those ways. But those were two sort of situations where I know that news stations are going to cover bad weather. That doesn't happen. And I know inevitably at some point I'm going to really screw up. And so I need to be able to have something that I can lean on when those two things happen.
I love it. I love it. And you know, I really got a lot out of the interview that I heard you on with Jen Gottlieb and Chris Winfield and
Awesome.
Be Connected Collective. And I loved when you were talking about also when you're in an interview and somebody just rambles on and on and you can't get a hold on it because they're just, you know, to back it up and just let's back up for a minute. And I have used that trick ever since because it really helps to keep the interview interesting for your listeners.
Yeah, well, because the tricky thing is when you're sitting in front of them, and I know how we're doing interviews now, whether they're on Instagram or whether you're, you know, on a news program somewhere, they've been a little bit different since March, right? Most of us are not face to face. And so that changes the dynamic and there are some tech issues that pop up, but the tenets are the same. And rambling interviewees will be rambling interviewees, whether they're in front of you or whether they're on a camera. I may be actually one of them right now.
No,
but
definitely not.
But if it's a non-contentious interview, saying from the outset before you even get on the air, listen, I want you to shine in this interview. And if I sense that we're kind of going on track, I'm going to jump in and I'm just going to get you back on track so that you can make sure that your messaging and everything is exactly where it needs to be. So you're letting them know up front that I'm going to help facilitate this for you. I'm going to make sure that this is a great experience, that our listeners get a great experience, and that your potential clients see you in a wonderful light. So you're kind of letting them know ahead. Now, if you're doing a, you know, for example, a contentious interview as I had done with like a politician, I'm not going to make that offer. I'm going to let you wander off on your own. And then I'm going to make sure everybody knows that we had to bring you back. But if you are dealing with a client or somebody the whole parameter of the interview is different. And so saying, you know what, that's interesting. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But, you know, 15 minutes ago, you mentioned that there was this really cool thing, and I want to dive into that a little bit. And then you move on from there, and the interview redirects itself with your help into the area and arena in which you needed to go.
And I love the fact that they may not even remember what it was they were saying. And so you can just move on.
You can just move on. I mean, here's the thing, you know, you have to realize when people are listening or watching, they usually can go back. I mean, they can hit stop and they can hit rewind or whatever it is, back up. But most people don't do that. And if they lose track of where the conversation is going, number one, they're out. But the chances are in an interview, they're not going to remember every single detail. And so you 9 times out of 10, you don't want to promise something that you're not delivering on, but 9 times out of 10, they're not going to remember. And what I sometimes do is this. Another little sidebar is if there was a particular element that we didn't get a chance to circle back to, you know, I said, hold off on that. Let's talk about this. I will usually ask them a question via an email about that. And then I will include that little tidbit of text, either in the captions along with wherever I post the interview, or as a follow-up for people who watch the interview in like a newsletter or a, something or other. So we're continuing to create that conversation. And I've used a little tidbit from the interview that we didn't get to air or didn't make it in. And I'm using that to continue to engage with, followers or people on your email list, et cetera, et cetera.
I love that. That's so creative.
Thanks.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
Now, I know many of the listeners can relate to what you said earlier about being scared to death of public speaking, because I think for many it's like a fear almost worse than death.
Mm-hmm.
And I can relate because I would be that person that was.
Were you?
Oh gosh, are you kidding me? That was like I ran the track and my heart was pounding out of my chest,
Mm-hmm.
And so what were your tips and things and tricks that help you overcome that fear?
I think there's a couple of things that, and I'd love to hear what you did as well, because there's probably some overlap. There are strategies that you can use. So for example, one of the things that I used to do in the beginning was I tried to pretend that anxiety wasn't there. I don't see you. I'm not, but I would find the more that I would try and resist it, the more urgent it became. And so what I would eventually end up doing when I figured this strategy out, is I would say, hi there, anxiety, I'm exaggerating for effect, but hi there, anxiety. I see you. I acknowledge you. I know you're going to be with me through the duration of this, but that's okay. We're going to get through it. And that would give me a little bit of agency over that anxiety, and giving me agency over that anxiety meant that I felt a lot more comfortable to address it and do things to handle it. So whether it meant I needed to run around the building for 5 minutes to burn off some extra energy before I got up and gave a speech, whether it meant that I needed to have every single word written down that I wanted to say. And it could have meant any number of things depending on the situation. It may mean that I really had to use large arm gestures that's one technique to help burn off extra energy. I mean, if you're really nervous or you don't know what you're doing, it can get a little bit distracting, but otherwise, if you know how to use your body and your gestures to amplify your message and not detract from it, being able to use them in a grand way not only helps your message, but it also helps dial back some of that nervous energy that we have. But really and truly, I will tell you this, it came down to doing it. And it came down to getting on the air, and it came down to making it happen, no matter how crappy it ended up being. And trust me, there are plenty of times it's pretty bad, but realizing that as bad as that show may have been, I still was able to push away from the desk, stand up, walk away. Nobody fired me. I still had my paycheck. I went home, I slept, I got up the next day, and I did it again. And that's just what it is. You can make a bunch of really horrible errors, and trust me, I did. But you're still going to walk away from it. You're still going to be on your 2 feet. And so what? What if somebody really says something nasty about it? Or so what? What if you really do screw up? I mean, there's a million stories out there going back generations where we can talk about, like, Abraham Lincoln. How many times did he run for election? 16, and he didn't make it. And finally on the 17th try, he did. I mean, there's a million stories out there that support putting one foot after the other. And one failure doesn't mean that everything is sunk. And so it's just, you must do it. You absolutely must make yourself do it. And then the confidence comes, again, not from being perfect, but from realizing that you can screw up and still stand on your 2 feet and come back again and do it the next day. And you can recover from that. That's really what it comes down to. Yeah. And every now and then when you think you have it figured out, you make 2 steps forward and you're sucker punched with a horrible mistake and you're back 3, but that's okay. That's okay, because you already have the next 2 steps figured out, and you're going to get to the 3rd one and the 4th one even quicker than you did before. It's not a linear process.
Love that so much.
Thanks.
It's all about feeling the fear. You're going to feel
Yeah.
it.
Well, what
But
did you do?
do it
How did you
anyway.
get over it?
For me, I think it was a process,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it was also recognizing the fear, but realizing that the things I had to say to people were important,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to put my full energy towards saying them rather than being stuck in fear. So
Yes.
I didn't want half of me in fear, because if all of me was in, I could fully, powerfully deliver my message.
That is so, so very true. And sometimes it's just a matter of sort of switching that mindset or changing the way that you think about things or the way you frame things.
And a fun thing that my husband and I did was improv, and that really
Oh,
helped.
yes. It does help, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So what did you take an improv class or did you practice just at home?
we took an improv class together.
That is hugely helpful. You know what? I'll give your viewers a little trick because improv can be expensive, it can be time consuming, but one of the things that I used to do when I was a brand new reporter and I was only making $17,000 a year, I definitely didn't have money for improv, but I used to take, for example, a pen, something that I really don't have strong feelings about one way or the other. It could be an eyelash curler, it could be like a notepad, whatever. And I would talk about that. I would just ad lib about it for 30 seconds and then 60 seconds and then 90 seconds. And then I would go up to about 5 minutes, which at the time was much more than any sort of breaking news segment I could ever have to do would be. And that's what breaking news is, it's ad lib. And I would just talk about it. It was okay if I repeated myself. I got comfortable with, look at this mascara. It is about 6 inches. It's about an inch, half an inch wide. It's called Mad Lash, made by Balm. It's a black color. And I would just talk about it and get comfortable with the idea of just speaking. And then I would take the same product or whatever it was, item, and I would gush about it. I'd be like, oh my gosh, this mascara is the best thing ever in the whole history of the world. You cannot believe my lashes are, and I would gush about it, because one of the things that I find that people struggle with when they're nervous, public speaking or on camera, is that all of the things that make them really interesting and energetic and compelling to listen to, they get so nervous, it all shuts down. And they become very dry and canned and sort of like a shell.
Because they're scared to death.
They're scared to death. They're scared to death. So one of the ways to practice maintaining that energy, even when you are uncomfortable or not in a good spot, or really, I don't have 5 minutes of information about mascara to talk about, but I'm going to gush about
I
this
love
thing.
how I love it. It's smoke and mirrors in a way.
Yeah, that's it. And I used to do that when I was a cub reporter, and for clients that I have now that I'm doing media training with, or who are just trying to get comfortable speaking off the cuff at a webinar or at a networking event, I give them that exercise to practice with, both of those actually.
I love that. What is your most embarrassing story that's happened to you on air?
Oh, God. Well, I have two. One of them is, so I always worked a morning show, and not always, I did some evenings, but mostly morning news. I love morning news, but it's a long show. It's usually at least 3 hours. So there's always a point in that 3 hours, especially after your third or fourth cup of coffee, that you are going to need to use the facilities. And generally what I would try and do is, when weather was going, I would race off the set and run to the restroom. Or when we were in a commercial break, I would race off the set and I would run to the restroom. And we have lavalier mics, which are the little mics that clip to your collar or the, of your shirt, and then they're wireless. But you have control of whether they turn off and on. So you probably see where this is going. I ran into the restroom and forgot to turn my microphone off, and the weather guy was talking and they hadn't potted down my mic in the audio. And so for a good 10 seconds, you heard me in the restroom go out over the air. Like you heard all of that stuff going on. So that was probably one of my more cringe-inducing moments. You know what? And I'll share this one with you as well. There's actually another one, but it's a long story. So for this one, it was my first live shot at my news station. And for those of you who aren't familiar, a live shot is like when you see the anchor at the desk and then there's a reporter out in the field live reporting either on some sort of news situation or there's something going on. It could be any number of things. So I was the one who was out in the field, and there was a blood drive, and we were approaching holiday time. Around holidays, blood donations always go down. And so we were pushing this big initiative with, I believe it was the Red Cross, for this blood drive. And I had seen somebody at a station that I had interned at do a similar story. And their first line was, and the parking lot is filling up. People are, blah, blah, blah. There's a good turnout, yada, yada. And I was so freaked out, I couldn't think of anything else to say other than the exact same thing. The parking lot is filling up. There's a really good turnout. This is a strong initiative, except there was not a single car in the parking lot. There was nobody there. And it was very clear that I was not telling the truth. And it wasn't that I intended to lie. It was just that I lost it, like right before it was time for me to go, and I couldn't think of anything to say, despite the fact that I had written down my scripts. I'm like, oh yeah, the parking lot's filling up. You can see all of the cars. They're there, I promise, or they're heading this way. It was just a mess. And thank goodness everybody had a good sense of humor about it. It was my first live shot. You expect those things to happen. That's why they put me on sort of a fluffy story. But yeah, that was one that I will never forget either.
I love that. I mean, it makes you relatable, and I think it makes people feel kind of like a part of what's going on, that it isn't all perfect hair and perfect,
No, it's not anywhere close to any of that stuff. Listen, we're all a mess at some point or another, especially when we're first starting out. And very oftentimes when you're first starting out, your viewers get to like participate in that whole mess.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. I love hearing all the stories with being on camera, because now it's not just for newscasters or movie stars. It really has become a viable part of everyone's job and work because of COVID-19 and just the way we have the internet. What are 3 great tips for people to be camera ready?
Be camera ready. So a few quick things that I always advise people, and you're right, just to piggyback on what you said, you may not have ever intended on having an on-camera career, but if you are networking and talking to clients and even talking to colleagues and your boss via Zoom or some other video platform, you are very much on camera. So a few quick tips that I always like to let people know. Number 1, the camera has the way of amplifying everything that you hate and muting or tamping down everything that you want to amplify. And so when you are speaking to the camera, I want you to think of yourself on a stage and you are speaking for the people in the back of the room. And what I mean by that is everything needs to be more energetic and a little bit larger than life. You've got to you will feel like you are wildly gesticulating and your facial expressions are cartoonish. You'll feel like Jim Carrey. But the truth is, you very rarely does it actually look over the top. But the biggest mistake I see from people is low energy. And that does a couple of things. It doesn't, if you're with a client, it doesn't inspire confidence in your client. If you are a boss and you show up to that meeting looking low energy, you begin to erode the trust that your employees have in you. And right now, when we can't, for the most part, see our employees in person, and we're doing everything on camera, keeping that authority and keeping that credibility and that communication going is so important in continuing to maintain cohesiveness and culture and letting your employees know that, you know what, I don't have all the answers, but I am on top of this and I am bringing my A game to you every single day. You can trust me to lead you through this mess. So number one is energy. Number two, one of the biggest questions I get from people is, where the heck do I look when I am doing something on camera? I never know where to look. I feel weird looking in the camera. I can't see the people below. And so there are some caveats to this, but sort of a best practice rule of thumb is this: when you are talking, you are looking into that little camera at the top of your computer, that one right there. And the reason that you're doing that is because, although it feels weird because you're talking to a lens and you're not talking to the person whose face you can see below the lens, to the person on the other side, they don't see or feel any of that awkwardness. All they see is you looking at them in the eye. That's what looking in the camera is. It's you looking that person in the eye. So for example, if you were watching the news and the anchor person was not looking directly in the camera and therefore looking you in the eye, and instead was talking on the camera like this the whole time, it would be, after a while, a little weird. The follow-up question that I get after that all the time is, but I can't glean any nonverbals. I'm looking at a lens. I can't see what the person is doing. They're down there. I want to look at their face. Darn it, what do I do? So what I say is this: you're talking, you're looking at the lens. That person is talking, you're looking down in the monitor. And that is when you try and recoup some of those missed nonverbal communications that come across. It's not perfect by any stretch. It is just one of the challenges and obstacles that we have to figure out how to overcome to some degree and mitigate. So you're talking, you're looking in the lens. The other person is talking, you're looking at them down in the monitor, and you can see what their face is doing. You can see how they're sitting. Are they smiling? Are they frowning? Do they look agitated? And that's when you start to glean all of that information. And finally, my third suggestion is lighting. It's really lighting and framing, but I'll do this quickly. We've all seen this shot, yes? Right? Where it's like, I'm looking at the person's ceiling and I can't see them. You're not doing anybody any favors, least of all yourself. Make sure that you're filling that video space, because that's how you're making your presence known. So you need to raise your computer, you need to adjust the back of your laptop to forward or back to put you in the frame. That's important. Lighting is another big thing. And we've all seen where somebody's sitting with the brightest light source in their room to their back, and their face is in the shadows and they're almost shot in silhouette. And that, again, you're doing yourself a huge disservice. If your presence and your face were not important, none of us would be doing any of this on video. We'd be doing it via phone call and an email, and we'd be sending slide decks rather than talking about them on video if that element weren't important. So make sure that people can see your eyes. I like to liken it to the way a news anchor is framed on a news desk, and you may or may not agree with the news, like the news, whatever, but I'm talking strictly logistics and aesthetics here. And they're framed tightly, right? Like here up. Right. And the reason they're framed that way and the reason they're lit that way is so that they can look in that camera and they can look the viewer in the eye. And that is hands down the easiest way to start establishing rapport, credibility, and trust. So make sure that your viewer can see you in the eye, your viewer, the person who's on the other side of the webinar or event or whatever it is that you're hosting, with lighting, framing, and making sure that you're looking in the camera.
So how do you keep your energy? Like, there are days I may have several guests, and then I taught a bazillion classes or something, personal training. And then how do you keep your energy up for the broadcast? You know what? It's tricky because I'm in the same boat that you are. There may be some days when I have 9 or 10 Zoom calls back to back, and
there's a few ways that I do it. Oftentimes I try and keep them a little bit shorter than I would a normal meeting. So if a normal meeting is 60 minutes, I might try and make it 45, unless it's a paying client, then obviously they get their money's worth. But I try and shorten them. I really try not to schedule myself that way. But you're right. There's some days that it's inevitable. And in those cases, I just have to turn it on. And I hate to say this because it feels somewhat inauthentic. Part of it is because I did this for 20 years before I was on, like, there's plenty of days when I had to wake up at 1:30 in the morning and I was 8 months pregnant and my two other kids kept me up all night long and my husband's out of town and I had to drive into the city. I looked like I wrestled with a bag of hammers all night. I didn't have a choice though. If I stepped onto that set and I acted the way I felt, you would have heard the collective clicking of remotes all across the Hudson Valley. I didn't have that choice. And so I've learned how to turn it on. And for lack of a better word, that's what you have to do as well. You're going to get off that Zoom call and you're going to collapse, but you must bring it for that half an hour or that hour or whatever it is. And it's a performance. It really is. You're not up for an Emmy or an Oscar. It's not as glamorous as any of that, but it is very much a performance. And you are on, except when you're in Zoom, you are the actor, you are the director, you're figuring out where you are, and you're the producer. If you're hosting an event, you've got to keep track of everybody else as well. So you're doing all of those roles in one, which is part of the reason it's so exhausting. But you got to turn it on, man. There's not a choice. The reason I got good at it as news is because I could tell if I had a crap day, I could see it in the ratings. Not every day, but I could. Like if I had a down energy, I could see people leaving and I could see when they left and I could see what I was doing at the time when they left. And so from that, I've learned that there's not a choice. You just have to bring it. It doesn't matter.
It is a performance. And every time I would teach a boot camp, it's a performance and you have to turn it on at 5, mine's 5:30 a.m. No matter what you feel like that day, you need to bring it because you're the motivator and
your clients are depending on you. If you walk in there all like, oh God, I'm so tired. Today sucks. They're going to be like, who's this? Get out of here, man. I'm not paying you. It's the same thing. You're absolutely right.
I do find telling myself, you're not tired, or just things like, you've got this, you've got all kinds of energy to burn. Just motivational kind of things. It seems like it helps a lot more than I'm so tired.
It's like that mindset. And you know what else? I wonder, do you feel like this at the end of a day that you're like dreading because you have back-to-back calls? At the end of the day, I almost feel like this little euphoria. I'm like, holy cow, I did it. And I'm not dead. Right? I mean, it feels good.
You feel good. It's like you went from feeling that way, but everything you did in your day made you feel better and actually provided you with some energy. Maybe your calls were awesome and it lifted you right up.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you have this as a fitness trainer and somebody who works out. Like, do you ever have those days when you go to the gym and you're like, or maybe you're not even there yet and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the last freaking thing that I want to do, right? Do you have those? And then I used to say to myself, okay, just go for 5 minutes. If you're there and you're there for 5 minutes and you still want to go, then I would give myself permission. But 5 minutes in, I was like, I'm here now. I might as well knock it out. And it's like, just changes your mindset once you step in.
Yes. And it's a great way to trick the mind. Anytime you're starting into kind of a fitness regimen is to just set a set point. Maybe you can't run, say I'm going to run to that tree, and then you run a little further, right? So you just have to keep doing that until all of a sudden you're running all the way around the lake. And
then you look like you do on your book cover.
Oh, thank you. My goodness. That was fitness competitions. They really push you. It's a goal. And setting goals, I think, really help you to stay on point.
They're tough, especially right now. I mean, I'm sure you're feeling it too. We're all like, I don't know if burned out is the right word, but we're all exhausted, and I think in a different way than we were 6 months ago.
Well, it's truly like you have to work harder for the same result.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
And it's a lot of it, I think, is just the stress of it, but also you're finding a new way to pivot, and so you're not on autopilot anymore.
Yeah. How have you had to pivot? What have you done?
So with the gym,
Uh-huh.
total pivot because we
Yeah.
had to close for 3 to 4 months. And so what I did, I was already used to being on Zoom, and also I'm a survivor. So I was just like, oh, survival mode. I've got this. And so I was like, what people need right now is to be connected. So I just drove that bus right through, and we all connected on Zoom. Everybody could talk to each other. We
Love it.
worked out, many things. I did a lot of things on Zoom with my group, and I didn't get any cancellations at the gym.
That's awesome. Good for you, man. You figured it out.
Yeah, and I think everybody is figuring it out, and we're tougher than we give ourselves credit for.
It's very true.
So how tough have you had to be a woman in a field full of men?
Well, you know what? I would say that the industry has changed. I was in it for 20 years, and I've been out for a little over a year now, just about a year, I guess. And there are more women on air than there ever used to be. And there are more behind the scenes, but in the upper echelons, it's still quite a male dominated industry. A lot of that has changed since stories about Charlie Rose and Bill O'Reilly and Roger Ailes and Matt Lauer have come out. And, there have been high level female executives at ABC, Barbara Fadida, who all of them have been accused and confirmed to have had harassment, whether it was, sexual harassment or gender-based harassment or mistreatment. And the industry is getting more aware of it. I will tell you, I was pretty lucky in that I never worked with somebody who was outright abusive. I've certainly worked with my fair share of jerks and figured out how to handle them. But the climate is definitely changing. News has so many challenges right now. I mean, it's an industry in a state of contraction because more people are curating their news feed on their phone. They're not sitting down to watch the 5 or the 6 o'clock news anymore, at least not the younger generation. So news has got its fair share of challenges. But in terms of dealing with everything in the Me Too movement and all of the fallout after that, it was just, for me, it was a matter of like speaking up and, realizing that when I had a gut instinct that something wasn't sitting quite right, it didn't necessarily meant I ran to HR or I filed a formal complaint, but I noted it. I certainly noted it. And in fact, I have notebooks full of dates and times and people and everything else, so that if anything ever happened that was called into question, I had a whole slew of documentation that would be super difficult to argue with. So I suppose in that regard, I was proactive. Thankfully, I never had to get to the point where I had to do anything with it. Although I know that I know plenty of women who have. It's a tough thing.
What do you wish, or what would you want every woman out there to know?
Boy, that is a really good question. So one of the things that I think I learned in the course of my career is that we really do have a strong sense of resilience. Unfortunately, oftentimes, I think this is changing, but oftentimes we second guess ourselves into oblivion. I mean, I've had female bosses who have said to me, when you speak up at a meeting, a story meeting, don't just say, I have an idea. Say it like this. Well, I have an idea, but I don't know. It may be good. Maybe it's out of left field. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think, to sort of appease the egos that were in the room. Heaven forbid I have an opinion of my own. But what I have also learned is that there is because we're almost still finding where that happy middle ground is, I can swing way far to the right and be way too complacent, and I can swing way far to the left and be way too militant. And it's finding that authentic spot in the middle where you're listening to yourself and you're honest with yourself and you can communicate effectively. And that's all anybody can ask of you. And one of the things that I found really difficult, but have learned to since accept, and I'll use the news analogy again, is I'm sure we've all heard of the term Twitter trolls, and there are millions of them out there, and they're random viewers who like to tweet or connect with people who they see on air and tell them how freaking awful they are and how biased they are and how crappy their reporting is and how they look fat and their clothing looks rotten and blah, 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 blah.
Gosh, yeah.
What I had to learn to do was I had to be vulnerable enough not to blow everything off, but strong enough not to take in all the BS and to just take in the real critique that meant something, learn from it, not let it cripple me, and then move on. And so being true to yourself and figuring out, not finding that happy medium is, I guess, the best way to put it, when it comes to realizing what you have to work on and what you don't need to listen to.
Oh, you're so great. This has been so amazing. I have enjoyed every second. I can see why you were on air for 20 years.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That's so kind of you.
So enjoyable.
Great. Thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, and I just really want to acknowledge you for being such a strong and powerful voice in the industry, and also having the courage to leave it when it was no longer the thing for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know what I was doing when I left. Some days I still don't, but I am really happy to be on the path that I am now. I'm a much happier person.
Perfect, and that's what we all like to hear.
Thank
Oh
you.
my gosh. Well, she has to rush, guys. She has an interview at 3,
Yes.
so I've got to be true to my word. So thank you so much, Kerry, and thanks
Thank you.
everybody.
Oh, it was a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Bye. Thanks everybody for listening to the Sisterhood of Sweat.